Hey there, Grant Kemp with CreativeCashFlow.com. Today we get to talk a little bit more about owner financing. Owner financing is my favorite strategy, as you know. Let's talk generally. Let's figure out what's going to be things that you need to keep your eyes on now that you've decided that you're going to sell with owner financing. This is part of our disposition series. This is part of figuring out what you're going to do once you've acquired the property. Oftentimes that acquiring might happen with owner financing, like with subject to, but now we're talking about disposition. What are some things that you need to look at? Owner financing, hands down, is the most complicated version of single family investing that I'm aware of. I mean, it's just, you got a ton of gears turning, you got a lot of stuff going on that you need to be aware of. But once you know it kind of inside and out, and you're really inside of this and you can start mixing and matching strategies, I mean, the sky's the limit. You're really able to do so much with it, and that's why I love it so much. But there are things that you need to be aware of. There are things that you need to be watching out for to keep yourself from tripping up and keep yourself from falling into a hole that others may have fallen under. So let's look at some of those and keep our eyes on those. The big one that I'm going to bring up first, because this is the biggest hole that I fell in at first, was MIP and PMI. Now, watch the advanced series to learn how you can recapture these costs. But if you have taken over a loan subject to that has MIP on it, or PMI, which is private mortgage insurance or mortgage insurance premium, that is not a cost that you can just inherently pass on to your buyer. I've mentioned this in a couple of other videos that currently I'm making about $90,000 less a year than if I had been aware of these PMI and MIP rules, because I saw MIP in the escrow account, didn't really respect it, and was just like, well, I don't care about the escrow account. Escrow, that's stuff that the buyer pays for, right? Taxes and insurance. I'm not even going to look at it. This is my first year of doing business in the owner financing world. Well, then once I learned, wait a minute, I'm not accounting for the PMI here. I'm only saying that taxes and insurance are paid for them. I'm not counting for the PMI. I'm losing a ton of money that I could have been making, right? Now, eventually that will get paid off and we'll drop PMI and it'll be great and I'll be making that money again, but that would be something that I'd like to have that income with right now. So keep your eye on that. Another thing, make sure that your underlying lien is less than your owner financed note. I know that with payments and everything, there are ways to creatively make sure, like let's say that you have a $115,000 underlying lien to Wells Fargo at 3%. Well, you could have a $110,000 loan to your new buyer at 9.5% and actually be making cash flow on it, actually be making more money every month than the underlying lien is asking for. However, if that person refinances or if that person sells their property, you're left with the bag, right? If they refinance, they're going to pay you off the 110, but you have to come up with the extra $5,000 to pay off Wells Fargo, because all those liens need to be paid off at the time of that refi or that sale or whatever's going on right there. So be careful. Make sure that you're not overextending what's going on. And if you are, I mean, there's nothing legally against that, and you can watch our advanced series to figure out, how re-amortizing the underlying debt might be a good idea to get that thing paid off more quickly, but you're taking a risk, and I don't like taking risks. I always say we're not gamblers, we're investors. Are you going to assign or are you going to wrap the disposition? Watch the assignments versus wraps video to see kind of differences between the two. I prefer going with the wrap. You have more control. Ultimately, you make more money. And again, I always stress this, when you're doing a job like this, when you're doing owner financing with somebody, you're sitting in front of a seller and you're having them trust you about stuff. And I feel like with the wraparound and the subject to version versus doing an assignment, which you'll learn about in that video, personally, from kind of I don't want to say moral standpoint, but I feel like you're doing better by the seller at that point in time. So watch that video to figure out both ways and decide what's going to go on for you. You can't refi once you sell this property. Sometimes people will get into debt on the property and then sell it on a wrap and say, well, I'll just refinance out of this once I get the... Conventionally, that can't happen. That's one of the things that you can do a collateral assignment to get that done, and you can watch our advanced series to learn about collateral assignments, but conventionally, the way that you may be thinking of it, you're not going to be able to refinance that because you no longer own the home. You no longer own that house, right? So you can watch our basics video or subject to video. I bring that up a little bit there, and then we'll have an advanced series as well to talk about this. Your underlying payoff needs to be before the owner financed notes payoff, okay? So similarly to how you don't want to have a more expensive underlying lien than your owner financed wrap note, you also don't want your payoff of the underlying lien to be 5 years after your payoff of your owner financed note. Because again, when they pay that note off, your buyer on the wraparound, when they pay that note off, you've got to have clear title. Everything needs to be paid off at that point in time. So if you've still got 5 years left on your underlying lien, that's money that you're going to have to reach into your back pocket and pay off. Again, what you can do is re-amortize that loan. So maybe it is, maybe it is paid off in 20 years, but you've got a 15-year note with your new buyer. Just figure out what the amortization is of that loan, your underlying debt, whatever the balance is, whatever the interest rate is, but change the time from 20 to 15 years using your 10b2 calculator and start making that payment every month. It's as easy as that. And so if you factor that in whenever you're acquiring and selling the property, that gives you an idea of what your real cash flow is, because you can get that underlying lien paid off in a proper amount of time and actually be making the money that you're looking to make. When you're doing owner financing and you're putting a owner financed buyer into your property, again, we're talking on the sales side here. When you're putting an owner financed buyer into there, they're going to live in that property most likely. It's going to be their residence, and this is a consumer transaction. Okay? Now, when we're acquiring the property, we don't plan to live there. So it's a business transaction. It's called a commercial transaction. But now that we're talking about putting an owner-occupant into the property, it's consumer. So you need to be aware of that. You need to be aware of the state and national laws that go along with that. So watch the Dodd-Frank video. The Dodd-Frank video is going to talk about, those are the lending laws that came out nationally after the housing crisis that we're very much under, that we fall under that area. So watch that video to learn a little bit about what's going on that side, and make sure that you've got a good RMLO and a good attorney team on your side that are used to doing owner financing and wraps and subject to and that kind of stuff, so that you're properly protected. There is a full Dodd-Frank series video. However, let's take some quick hits of it, just since you're kind of getting an idea of your owner financed disposition at this point in time. The quick hits are: don't do any balloons, don't do interest-only loans, don't do negative amorts, have a 30-year maximum amortization on your sale. There is interest rate thresholds that you need to be aware of, but I also want you to understand that there's not caps. State usury is your only cap. Some of the misinformation that floats around there is people say, well, you can't charge more than 10%, can't charge 12%. You can charge whatever you want up until your state usury. Here in Texas, that's about 17%. But you do have thresholds that once you pass them, you've got separate compliance issues that you need to worry about. That's going to be something that we'll talk about in the Dodd-Frank video, but that's just kind of the quick hit here. The quick hit easy thing is, like right now, our interest rates are sub 4, in the 4s, somewhere in there. The easy way of thinking about it is think about whatever the basic interest rate is, right? Whatever most people are getting, add 6.5 to that and try and stay under it. But again, watch the Dodd-Frank video to learn the real formula of what matters and when. And then lastly, no prepay penalties. That's another quick hit for Dodd-Frank compliance. Just don't do any prepayment penalties. In other words, a lot of times people will do a mortgage and they'll say, it's a 30-year loan, but if you pay me off in the first 3 years, you're going to have to pay a penalty of $5,000. You can't do stuff like that. That doesn't work for having a qualified mortgage, which is what we're shooting for in this world. Are you going to rehab the property? Because if you are, you can get full price. You're probably going to sell it faster. If you're not going to rehab the property, that's okay. It's probably going to take you a little bit more time to sell it, but you need to be counting on a discount. You need to be assuming that you're going to have to discount typically either the material cost of what it would take to do the rehab or half of whatever the actual rehab costs would be. Knock that off of your sales price whenever you're selling it. Okay? Who's your closing agent? You need to get in contact with your closing agent. Again, here in Texas, I recommend using Scott Horn & Associates. Those guys know what they're doing with this kind of stuff. But if you're going to use somebody else, make sure you get in touch with them and understand that you're going to use their contracts. They may want to see something done a specific way on certain contracts, and that's fine. Just kind of get an idea of what's going on so that you're ready to go whenever that does hit your table. Similarly, who's your buyer? You need to know your demographics of your buyer and market accordingly to that. For instance, here in Dallas, 90+% of my buyers, Spanish is their first language. So our signs are in Spanish for these properties, dueño a dueño, and a phone number, and how many bedrooms and bathrooms. It's owner financing. That's how you say it in Spanish. It's owner to owner. So that is how we market. Know your demographics and market accordingly. But also, be careful of what's called a trigger term. Now, to download, go to the comments, go look underneath the video, find the downloads, look for the trigger terms worksheet, because I've actually provided to you what trigger terms are, what the law says about trigger terms. The short story is, if you say certain things, you have to follow it up with a bunch of other stuff. So that's why, like in any radio ad that you hear all that stuff, or any radio ad you hear for mortgages, you hear all that stuff at the end where they're like, APR is blah, 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 RMLO license, blah, 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 blah. It's because they have set a trigger term, and now they have to say a bunch of other stuff because they've said something about the length of the loan. So now they have to tell you what the APR is. They have to tell you, all this kind of stuff. So download that worksheet so that you can figure out what trigger terms are, and be very careful about how you advertise. You can't say what the payment is going to be if you're not going to say what the APR is. You can say low monthly payment on your sign, but you can't say the payment. You can't say the interest rate. You can't say several. So download that form and look through it, or that worksheet and look through it. Servicing. The servicing of the note is something that you need to be aware of as well. Who's going to service the note? Who's going to hold that, collect the payment, and pay the underlying debt? Well, August REI is based out of Garland, Texas. They're somebody that we've used in the past. They do a pretty good job at things. Prime Loan Servicing is down in Houston, Texas. One big benefit that they have is they're able to report to credit bureaus. In order to get your buyer's credit report score affected by the payments that they're making with you, you have to score to 2 credit bureaus, 2 of the 3, because mortgage companies look at the mid score of the 3. So if you're not affecting 2 of those scores, it's useless. You're not affecting anything, because the new credit people are going to look at the middle score of the 3. So you've got to affect 2 of those. Prime Loan Servicing is the only one that I know that does affect 2 of those credit bureaus, but they're more expensive. It's more expensive to use them. But if you've got a buyer who's really interested in refinancing later, that would be the servicer you might want to use. Evergreen Note Servicing is based out of Washington. Their big benefit is that they're cheap. They're very cheap. I think last I checked, they were like $15 a file. And then yourself. You may want to service yourself. Watch the Should I Use a Third-Party Loan Servicer video, because I don't use a third-party loan servicer anymore. I have a big enough operation that I have staff on hand to service my notes for me, and it has also become an income and revenue stream for us. Not only do I have more control over the situation, but I also have another revenue stream. So watch that. That's going to be definitely something that you will grow into and mature into. I do not recommend you servicing your own notes right away, but it is something to consider. So watch the advanced series and about the Should I Use a Third-Party Loan Servicer. Prefer principal over interest. Watch the wraparounds video, because this is a really important principle to understand. If you have the option of getting the same payment, but one option is a higher principal amount and a lower interest, and the other option is a lower principal amount with a higher interest, choose the one with the higher principal amount. Watch the wraparounds video to explain why that is. And make sure that you're accurately calculating their payment. You're going to need to watch the 10B2 calculator series and instructional to know how to do that. You're also going to need to watch on how to calculate taxes, and you're going to need to watch backing into the deal in order to fully understand all of these items that are going to be needed for an accurate calculation of the buyer's payment, because you can't just be like, oh, your payment's $756 because that's your principal and interest. I see a lot of people slip up with that with their advertising. When they're selling a house, they'll say, well, the payment's $756 a month. And then the buyer gets into the disclosures and they're all confused why the payment is actually $1,000, $1,200. And it's because there's taxes and insurance and all these other things that are included in it, HOA, whatever that is. And it's, it's just basically dishonest to say it. So you need to show them their full payment, PITI, HOA, all included whenever you're doing this advertisement. Rental comps are your guide. Basically, whatever that house would rent for, that's going to be what that house would sell for, okay? So selling with owner financing is an awesome, awesome tactic. I really enjoy doing it. One of the things I always talk about, like I said, when was the last time, if you've got a mortgage, that you called Wells Fargo and told them that your toilet was broken, right? We are the bank in owner financing, and all we care about is getting paid. Just like the big banks, all they care about is getting paid. And you think about, the last time I looked at Wells Fargo's income statement, I think it was like 90 or 92% of their income was from mortgages, and they're only charging 3 and 4%. Well, guys, we're out there charging 9.5%. If every Wells Fargo that you've seen, if every Bank of America that you've seen is funded by these 3.5% interest rates, and every ATM and every employee and every commercial and all that kind of stuff is funded off of that, what do you think that it means for us when we can charge 9.5% on these interest rates, right? Mortgages are a good business to get into. There's a lot of options for it. So I appreciate you looking through this series and learning it. And keep on learning, keep on trucking through, and I will see you next time.